Chapter 4. Lethea brushed her long hair before she swept it up and wrapped it into a tight ponytail. As she slipped on her workout attire, she thought on this morning's final math exam. Her brother had won. She would be taking his task at wiping down the walls until the swim, because of it. Studying the smooth white corners in the room, she wondered how replicating these multiple walls would be possible without the advantage of proper tools. She had been practicing with sharp rocks and wooden peg-nails and gears, as instructed, but it proved difficult. Her work took much longer than she'd expected. The results she offered this morning appeared meager in comparison to the building she now stood within. This one, of course, had been constructed with the pod's modern tools. Still, it was obvious why she was not allowed the use of them for the exam. What would she actually have available to her on the other side, when the time came to create the community's multi-sided gawas? If construction was done well, and the shapes formed perfectly, the extra time with archaic tools would be more than worth the effort, she decided. A carpentry architecture expert to the core, Lethea was well versed in the importance of the properly constructed sacred gawas which the community residents lived within. They afforded greater spaces in rooms than any other style of home building. Abodes built in this manner not only offer the greatest views and use of natural lighting and heating, but also provided safety from many things. That would be important. These walls which stood before her, these great, smooth, white walls, with their paint reflecting the lighting to every inch of the room, were something she appreciated in their entirety. She enjoyed knowing each step involved in the building of their homes. Even the metal plates welded to the outer walls to protect pod residents from the horrific sun had been designed perfectly. Their look didn't bother her, and she was sure most residents didn't even notice them. After all, they had been painted over numerous times. For years the focus of Lethea's studies had been on important details such as this. She remembered Professor Mangy's first words to her about ancient geometry. It is behind all proper structures ever built, and the key to the entirety of the world. Lethea learned that ancient geometry was the basic design for life itself. She was grateful to have been assigned Michael Mangy and Mies Maxey as her professors. They were, after all, the finest and most knowledgeable in the pod community. Her training, which was identical to those used by the greatest architects of all time, would help her draw and construct the building she would soon be overseeing. Pod tales told that the ancient cities of Athens, Jerusalem, Egypt, and some Aztec structures based on those same architectural methods had even survived the annihilations of the weather wars. Of course, the people in those communities hadn't survived, and truly the rest of the tale was speculation. But Lethea chose to believe those structures still remained today. As she viewed the ceiling joints, she felt Teapot's gawas were even stronger than those of the ancients. They had been perfected to the fullest by implementing nature's example into ancient knowledge. Her community was one of the few still intact because of their construction. Each community gawa boasted 8 sides and 8 corners, and nestled together like octagonal beehives, representing perfect communities. While beehives kept only 6 sides, 8-sided structures proved most efficient to house a room's furniture. They also created more floor space for citizens to move about. Plus, they were aesthetically pleasing. She loved that. Lethea enjoyed immaculate construction and sterile appearance. She wanted things to look as perfect as the math they were based upon. If time math were as linear and easily learned, she would have beaten Kenter's score on this morning's test. She could never figure time math, no matter her efforts. Still, after today, it no longer mattered. He won their bet. She would do her brother's work until the launch. Oh well, at the least of it, his higher score made him feel more sure of himself. In that she was glad he had won, though she had tried. She rubbed her long, slender fingers over the crack in the wall. These past years, the growing line that started at the floor had slowly worked its way upward. Since she began marking it, it nearly doubled in length, the tip now almost as tall as her. Even in its perfection, according to the seers, this place would soon become a pile of dust. How much longer would the strong surrounding walls protect her community from the environment? The science advisors recently broadcasted the doom and gloom weather on the news. They reported to the entire community, saying it was only a matter of months before the pod walls would begin to fettle, which was the term used to describe a structure's serious disintegration due to solar storm wear and tear. After the announcement, Mize took her and Kenter aside to tell them the truth of the matter. He disclosed that those reported months would actually total around 5 years if the weather did not worsen, less time if it did. Mize felt the two needed to know why the council exaggerated the truth in a manner so blatantly overstated it could be construed as a lie to the entire community. Then he shared a great secret. The science advisors of the council had each agreed to the illegal act of lying in order to protect humanity as a whole. No adult ever mentioned anything so shocking to Kenter or Lethea as that confession. Those brilliant scientists had deliberately lied. Who would think it? While Mize's trust and information took them by surprise, one thing was clear. The weather situation was very serious, and the elders protesting the use of the pool of light needed their voices squashed. Humanity did need protecting, and Mize's team had stepped up to the plate to do just that. Lethea could not think it how a citizen would go against a swim, but some had. They were most often the lesser-educated elders, paranoid a radiation leak from the pool of light would kill the entire pod. But the science division knew better. Over and over they tested the machine. What happened to the first candidates, the originals, could never happen again. It would be impossible. The time scars were healed. The science division repaired the device and plugged all the holes. It was perfectly safe for both candidates and pod citizens. Aside from the legal end, Lethea and Kenter were grateful the science division's exaggeration worked to quiet those against the launch, for no young candidate could risk anything halting the swims they waited for and trained so long to make. Lethea thought to the originals. Had the pool of light incinerated them, as most believed? If it hadn't, surely the professors would have taught the students something of those citizens. Since words of the dead were not to be spoken, in all certainty they must be dead. If they had survived, day-to-day life in the clean world would be much different than in the pods. Daily words of the upcoming catastrophe would not be looming constantly in the air in the clean world, as it did here. Mankind was nearing its end at the pods. In a handful of years, all animals and human life would cease to exist. No one could stop it from happening. It had been foreseen in the machine, and so was set in unbendable time. All living things would simply perish from the earth in one horrific event. Seers had viewed it in the pool of light for decades, debating the community's choices at each annual session. Science Division seers determined before the first swim that it would take 1,000 years for the world to renew itself. That much time was needed until humanity and the other multi-celled creatures would once again benefit from the graces of the earth in order to survive. The planet had protected herself over the last half-century, harbored her energy, and starved living things in order to do so. Her current focus was the last of humankind, and rightfully so. For no creature had ruined earth more than the hands of ancient man. It furied Lethea to think it. How selfish the ancients had been to her generation, and the future of all people. If the swims failed, the only beasts in the earth's future in 1,000 years would be amoebas, and any other single-celled organism that could be viewed beneath the lens of a microscope. Man would simply perish forever. Those who fought against the Vision Fold's Pool of Light project were heartless. They seemed to Lethea as the crazed ancients, though she would never compare them to, nor use the term gold hoarder about anyone. No one alive could be as evil as that group had been. She could only guess why some of the older citizens opposed the light swims. Was it because they were too old to travel? No matter what happened with the Vision Fold project, the elders were guaranteed certain death on this ruined earth. How could any be so selfish to think it should be allowed for human life to die off, simply because they would? Tribe teachings advised towards survival of humanity in the future of the earth, after all. Something seemed very wrong with those handful of older ones who lacked community mind, and always seemed petrified of the coming doom. They were too solitary. Only a bit nervous of the world's end, Lethea was never terrified of it. Not really. Shy, yes. Compliant, yes. Quiet, in all certainty, but terrified of the world's end? No. Her generation was told the end story so many times since birth that it barely fazed them to think it. Besides, in some way it seemed unreal that it would actually happen. After all, it was not here now, in front of them, looking them right in the face. Unlike the elders, no one within her age group remembered a time without quakes and storms, or when constant talk of the end of the livable earth did not exist. To the youth of the community, things seemed just as normal as ever. The only time she worried was when seeing the fear in those elders' eyes. It unnerved her, and so she steered clear of them. Her focus must remain on the future, the clean world, and her building skills. Her eyes scanned the room. While the only lighting afforded here was artificial, knowing she would soon create spaces that used natural sunlight elated her. It would brush itself onto the walls without any form of generator. What a glorious sight that would be! Surely sunlight was breathtaking, but would it truly be safe there? Would it burn at their skin or eyes during extended exposure, as they had been taught? Hopefully training was correct, and a tree's shade would bring enough shelter, so the sun would not prove fatal. She knew without a doubt being cooked by a solar flare was the most horrid way to die. She heard told the stories about the fallen pods. Lethea wiped the worry from her mind, pulled on her shoes, and quickly tied the strappings. Her eyes caught sight of the octagonal mobile hanging in the far corner of the ceiling, and smiled. It was the small dream-catcher her brother made for her, with 3 real ancient feathers lining its bottom. The dust they carried forced a sneeze from her as she removed it from the hanger to rub her fingers across the stiff, hair-like protrusions on their ends. Of course the feathers were old and tattered, but their hard center stems remained straight and intact. They were as the pictures she'd seen of fish skeletons, but soft fibers remained at their tips. When she felt their ends, it comforted her. Kenter never did tell her where he found the priceless treasures, no matter how many times she'd asked. She guessed it was Arden's doing. He never feared broken rules, as Kenter and Lethea did. Perhaps he swiped them from one of the science labs. Not that she cared where they came from. Far from being a rule-breaker, she normally would have cared. But this close to the swim, it no longer bothered her. Besides, they mesmerized her as they hung from the edge of the dream-catcher. She'd never received a more precious gift. She was fortunate enough to have a sibling at all, but felt grateful in the truest sense to have a brother to love her who was as protective and loving as Kenter. On one side of the coin, he was her rock, and on the flip side, she offered him protection against himself. He was stubborn to a great fault. She sneezed again, then rubbed the dust from the delicate item onto her garment until satisfied it was clean. Quite sure the council would confiscate it if they knew she owned it, Lethea never reported this gift, as was required. It was not as if she had months to enjoy it. She felt no one could truly blame her for the crime of illegal feathers, for she played no part in the getting of them. But it was best not to take chances, even this close to the launch. Besides, feathers weren't needed for hunting any more. Citizens hadn't been allowed outside for decades. Even if they had, there was nothing left alive to hunt. After the bees and fish disappeared, birds were one of the next species to become extinct. Feathers for bows were impossible to find after that, so it became forbidden for anyone but the Pod Council to own them. The law against owning feathers, though old, had never been removed from the papers. Even mice had seen the mobile and done nothing. She hadn't been too worried about Kenter's gift at the time. In all certainty, she was due a rule-bender, too. Always the reserved intellect, she violated just 2 rules in the entirety of her life. Only one citizen knew, and that citizen would never speak it either. Not even Kenter knew, and he was the last person she would confide in, because he would react with his stubborn, blown-out tongue. His worrying for it would pain her ears until the launch. She decided never to tell him. Stolen time, along with another, holding hands for a moment, and 2 kisses, had been the riskiest things she'd ever done. She'd chosen to do it twice, yet still couldn't believe she had done it at all. It was as if another body took over hers for a moment, and then was returned, wide-eyed and remorseful. Well, as remorseful as one can be after feeling the pleasure of nature's lips to another. But yes, some things a sister doesn't tell a brother, especially when the brother is slotted as the first male to swim, and the lips belong to their friend. Lethea was famous for being the most cooperative candidate. She had received public recognition for it. Until those kisses, she had always followed rules. So when Mize came to her room 7 days ago, he merely glanced at the mobile, winked and smiled, and said nothing about the feathers. He knew Lethea. She would not well survive the public lecture that would occur were she caught with an unreported gift. Only when called to the council room, mere hours later, did she fear it had been reported. Her heart raced with worry until the Inquisition presented its questions. They weren't about her at all, but rather Kenter's hearing. She was not surprised to find the investigation initiated by Senator Lockley. He'd been trying to keep Kenter from this swim for the past 3 years, and Lethea's idea had caused it. Lockley's daughter Sandra was bumped from first on the list to swim down to 3rd place. It was all Lethea's doing. She designed an idea that gave Kenter the possibility to swim. Sandra's declining test scores since that day had pushed her name down further, to where she now stood at number 9. Her father was not happy. Why did Lockley continue to punish Kenter because of Sandra's failings? It would not bring his daughter back to the top. Lethea couldn't help the upward turn of her lips as she remembered that day. Perhaps Lockley wasn't really targeting her brother. Maybe he was simply eager to rid himself of his daughter. She had never cared for Sandra. Pushing her memories aside, she rubbed gently at the knots that kept the mobile's shape in place, and once again thought to the safety of her brother. While sure she could control the building of structures, her brother's well-being and his swim through time was another matter entirely. Would science and chance be enough to keep him alive? Females scored higher in every single test regarding the pool of light. It was fact. Would he survive the passage? She couldn't help but worry, even if there was no logic in it. She knew what going meant to him. Everything. It was all he talked about in his youth, even before they reopened the academy. He dreamed about being the first through since he could speak. Kenter had never been happier than she'd seen him these past years while training with the Visionfold project. Even her love toward the clean world was dwarfed by his passion to go. Her brother was fulfilling his life's dream, and dedicated in doing so. She would be supportive of him to any and every extent possible. Telling him her concerns for his safety regarding his swim was something she would never bring herself to do. He'd logic she was questioning his competence. It could affect his confidence level. It could break his mindset during transport, throw him off mentally. As proud as he was still male, and egos can grow weak in the presence of unwelcomed words. He needed to remain strong in every area. Nothing must divert his concentration if he was to survive the swim. More than that, though, Lethea knew how capable Kenter was of contributing greatly to the clean world. She loved her brother, and knew his many strengths, even if humility wasn't one of them. He had to survive, for the good of the community. There was that, and she could not bear the thought of life without him. The subtle smell of mint invaded her nostrils when Lethea walked through the entry door into the gym lab. She threw her towel on the rack, disappointed to see Dolores today, equipment in hand, ready and waiting for her. This female would have heard the news of Arden's meeting with Mize by now. She was so talkative. Though it was against pod rules, she spread words eagerly, more so than anyone Lethea knew. Dolores enjoyed stirring pots, ruffling up doubt regarding others, but was exempt from punishment for it, likely because she was matched with the son of a senator commander. The female was arrogant and irritating. Lethea could only just tolerate her. Today Dolores's breath smelled strongly of mint tea. She exaggerated her words and breathed out the heavy scent, seemingly to make Lethea envious. Even the elite candidates were not allowed it. Mints were reserved for specific council meetings. Lethea wished she had the luxury of that tea, but no matter. Soon enough she would have access to more mint than she could ever hope to drink. How was it this trainer always found her way to the forbidden, and no one said or did a thing for it? At least the teacup offered Dolores warm hands. Lethea was grateful for that. The trainer's fingers were not cold as she scanned Lethea's heart and stuck the sticky monitors on her forehead, down the length of her chest, and onto the arch of her back. She pushed a few buttons and sat to view the health screen. The workout machine switched itself on when Lethea positioned herself on the rower's seat. She began thrusting through the faux rapids that showed on the video screen before her. "So, mouse habit, Arden has done it again," said Dolores. Replied Lethea, pretending not to hear or care. "Apparently, the male has no eye control at all. Another meeting with mice. If he's not careful, they'll strike him from the program," Dolores continued. This female was so cruel. Lethea's heart raced. "No one has told me they've seen him touch a female, Dolores. Have you heard differently?" "Not yet, but it's simply a matter of time. From what I've heard, it seems he has little to no respect for mating and celibacy laws. Perhaps he isn't complying with his required 500 milligrams. Lethea didn't answer. Arden did comply with hormone laws, and he was still an innocent, like all other candidates, and anyone before the age of 20. He was none of Dolores's business. He'd never breached celibacy rules. He would have told her. What did Dolores care anyway? At 7 years past 20, she was too old for a swim. That was what bothered her. Arden was just show of it. He wouldn't actually break that law, would he? Lethea knew him well. He confided his true nature to her often, when Kenter wasn't present. Regardless of his joking talk and his somewhat wandering eyes, he desperately wanted to swim. The problem was he also wanted a match. Who could blame one with no parent or sibling for wanting a life match? She and Kenter and other siblings in the community had an advantage. Life was lonelier for the rest. Lethea stared the female's eyes away. If Dolores knew the truth of it, she would have realized community members spoke much more often of the med trainer's loose mouth than they did of Arden's loose eyes. If Dolores knew that, perhaps the busy-tongued female would stop digging around and spreading nonsense. Kenter should be more cautious in selecting his friends, Dolores continued. He is leaving, Dolores. Kenter's eyes concern themselves only with training, and he's more than prepared for this swim. What he and his friends do is none of anyone else's concern, said Lethea, who was growing angrier with each strained breath. Lethea decided against pursuing the argument. She realized what was truly upsetting her was the stress building about the swim, more so than her trainer's words. It was unlike her to meet argument with another. Lethea was peace-loving. This cheating female was not worth an emotional spar. Instead, she eyeballed Dolores as she drew in her next deep breath and pulled the rower's handles nearer to her chest. She would simply change the subject. But the trainer spoke before she could. "What's wrong?" Dolores asked. "A little concerned about safety," Lethea answered. "They've tested the machine 100 times this week. "The holes are gone," remarked Dolores. "I know," replied Lethea. "So what then?" asked Dolores. "Is he still giving you grief about the council questioning you?" Now she'd done it. This female had insulted both Arden and Kenter. Why would she choose it? "No," Lethea answered protectively. "Just worried about him." "So he finally forgave you, then?" Dolores continued on. "It wasn't as if you had a choice in answering the council's call for questions. What is wrong with him? Why he worried himself sick they were going to change their mind because of a hearing test. Ha! It's beyond me. After all, he scored in the 98th percentile. "It wasn't 100%, defended Lethea. "My brother felt good reason for concern." "Oh, for gravity's sake," said Dolores, with brows raised. She shook her head at Lethea. "So he finally found out he wasn't perfect," continued Dolores. "Who knew?" "Off," Lethea said through gritted teeth. Her clenched jaw was partially due to strain of rowing and partially from frustration. Dolores responded to Lethea's command by hitting a red button on her health screen. She stared. "Something else holds your thoughts today. Something besides your brother," she insisted. It was not a question Lethea would answer. She wondered about the originals who'd first gone through the pool. So much time had passed since then. If they had survived the swim, would they have survived the environment? Would they be there alone? The monitor beeped 3 times, then the sound of gears ceased. The screen of flowing rapids shut off. Dolores removed the sticky strips from Lethea's body as soon as she stood. "I'll do the run alone today," Lethea said, clearly frustrated at her trainer. "Keep quiet, then," Dolores responded. "None of my business anyway, Leth," she finished, and Lethea began her lone jog around the room.